heading out to Ottawa today.
You're in Ottawa?
I'm going today.
Oh, okay. You drive?
Yeah.
Have a good trip.
Packed up. Thank you.
Have a
Have a
great
good
trip.
We're just going for the first few days, so
Nice,
I'll
nice.
see each other before you go.
Okay. Okay. So just share my screen. Okay, so Chevra, what we were talking about yesterday, you've got this, we got the case of the car mirror, right? Smashed mirror, but then the car gets stolen and the guy loses his car entirely. So we're trying to find precedents in the Talmud, and the precedent that we're working on now is the case of where a guy throws a piece of a vase off the roof, and a guy comes with a bat and just swings it and breaks it on its way down. So who's liable? So the Gemara says that Hazorek Chayav v'Hamishaber Pater, the thrower is liable, not the breaker, because once he threw it off the roof, it was destined to break. Now, Tosfos, however, says over there, this is what we saw yesterday. It's only if when you throw something off a roof that the guy is that the thrower is chayv because he was handling the item directly. But if a guy shoots an arrow, okay, or fires a bullet, let's say, or he throws a rock, and that's supposed to hit a vase, and then another guy comes with a baseball bat before the arrow can hit it or the rock can hit it, and he breaks it first. So then zeh sheshiber chayav v'lo zeh shezarak esav. Then the guy who breaks it is chayav, and the reason is because the shooter did not handle the kli directly. The shooter did not handle the kli directly, and so that makes a difference. He says that and this is what we left off yesterday, that seems to be the consensus, is that there's a fundamental difference as to whether you are handling the item or whether you're shooting something towards the item that will cause its destruction. V'lachein, and therefore this is what we're up to. B'mikreh hazeh, כשהוא שיבר את המראה, עדיין לא נגנב הרכב. When the guy who broke the mirror, at that moment that he broke the mirror, the car had not yet been stolen. והוא התחייב לשלם את מלוא הנזק. And so the argument is that at that moment, at that moment that he breaks the mirror, he becomes chayev to pay full damages for the cost of the replacement of the mirror. And it's only afterwards that the ganovim came and they stole it. Pashut shechayav l'shalem. It seems obvious, says Rav Sharaga, that the guy who broke the mirror has to pay for the cost of the broken mirror. And he says, "Va'afilu l'divrei haktsois b'das harosh v'anemuke Yosef shecholken al Tosfos b'zorak chayitz." And even if you want to argue with Tosfos, like the Ktsos does, and he says that there are other Rishonim who hold that when you shoot an arrow, you're going to be liable. The shooter is going to be liable, not the breaker. Yodu b'mikra hazeh dechayev l'shalem. They will agree that in this case, the mirror breaker is going to be liable. The davka b'zorik chayitz hasheni sheshiber poter mishum shekvar nora hachayitz. He says it's only when you shoot an arrow or you throw a vase off the roof that we would say that the guy who does the initial act is liable, because and the person who breaks it is poter. Why? Because it's sequential. In other words, first the guy shot the arrow or threw the rock, and then the guy broke it with his baseball bat. But you can't say that the ganav is like the guy who the stealer of the car is like the person who breaks the vase. You can't say that the person who broke the mirror is like the guy who breaks the vase because it happens. The Geneva happens after he breaks the mirror, not before he breaks the mirror. Because the whole argument over there is you look at the vase that he's breaking as a pre-broken vase before he actually hits it with his baseball bat. Whereas over here, when he breaks the mirror, this car is not a stolen car yet. It only gets stolen after that. And therefore, it should seem obvious that he's going to have to pay.
If that's the case, and someone stole a car and then just hid it in their own area somewhere, and then some other guy came along and broke the mirror of the car that had already been stolen.
Yeah.
Would that?
So that might be a mitigating circumstance, but it depends what they're going to do with the car. In other words, is the car retrievable?
Yeah.
Can it be retrieved?
Yeah,
Or is it gonna take it to a chop shop?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, just reversing the order makes it more situation would be tough.
Right. And the Makor Baruch says, Venir lahavi od raya l'chayvet hamazik. He says, I can bring another proof. He says, Al pi masha nifsak b'shulchan aruch she'im hashomer pasha v'nignava mimenu habehema. That if a shomer is negligent, and then through not through because of his negligence, the animal gets stolen. La'achar mikain meta habehema kedarka beveit haganav. And then the animal just dies of natural causes in the possession of the ganav. Ein hashomer yochol liton shehu pater kevin shabehema haita meta b'chol ofen. The shomer cannot claim, well, I'm pater because the animal died of natural causes. That's an oines. I'm not liable for own sin. In other words, if you're negligent before the fact, right, and through your negligence, the animal gets stolen, you can't, and then the animal dies of natural causes. You can't say now, well, I'm putter for paying for the stolen animal because it died of natural causes anyway. It's going to die anyway, right? But just the opposite, which is like sort of to the benefit of the owner of the cow, right? I lent a guy a cow, or I asked him to watch my cow, right? He's watching my cow, but he left the door open, left the corral open, and as a result, it got stolen. But then the animal died of natural causes. So that shomer is still liable to pay me, even though the animal died, right? Because your failure, your act of negligence preceded the death. And therefore, that too is a situation where the damage precedes the theft. Since the damage precedes the theft, you look at it at that moment when he broke the mirror, that's when he becomes liable. Okay, so now let's go to the next paragraph. So, B'shuv ra'iti b'chidushe harashash b'sugiotenu shenishal ba'adam sheshiber eze chayfetz b'veis chavero v'achar kach partz asreif v'sarfet kol habayit kolel hachayfetz shenishbar. This was again a similar shaila. A person breaks a vase in his friend's house, accidentally bumps into it, knocks it over. It's the Ming vase, and it breaks. I don't know why the Ming dynasty is always the vase from a Ming dynasty. Okay, but anyway, so he breaks the vase, and then, unfortunately, the house gets on fire and burns to the ground, including the vase. So the guy who broke the vase wants to say, I'm putter, right? Upasak harashash shechayev hamazik l'shalim et malo hanezek, afal pi shegamim hu lo hayashover tachayfetz hu hayanisrav. He says, and the Rashash said, the guy who broke the vase has to pay the owner, even though the house was burnt to the ground a day later, right? And it
would've
would,
got destroyed anyway.
the vase would have gotten destroyed. V'loma din zeh bekal v'chomer mima shekosbu hatoisvis, and he learns it out from a kal v'chomer, from the case of Tosfos, sha'adam shezorik chetz al hakli, b'kadam acher v'shiber et hakli, that if a person shoots an arrow towards a vessel, and a second guy comes and breaks the vessel, shahashover chayiv. Remember, Tosfos says the breaker is chayiv, the guy who swings at it is chayiv. Afal pi dahavi bari hezeka sheyishaber al yedei hachetz. Even though it was inevitable that if he hadn't swung, the vase would still break because the guy had shot the arrow. Kal v'chomer lemi shehizik v'rak achar kach nafla deleka dechayev. So kal v'chomer, if when I broke the vase, it wasn't inevitable that the house was going to burn down, right? Because the arrow had not yet been shot. In other words, let's say the house burns down. Now, you could say, what if I broke the vase after someone shot an incendiary rocket towards the house?
Right.
That would be akin to the case of the guy who shoots the arrow and I break his vase before the arrow has a chance to hit the vase. But in that case, Tosfos says that the person who breaks it is chayiv. Kaven, but in the normal case, when I broke the vase, the fire hadn't started yet. V'harashash katav sham b'sof devar v'yesh laviraya l'nidon zeh b'divrei hanimuke Yosef ala mishnah b'perak haminiach b'shnei shavarin tamin shechavlu zeh bazeh ad kan devarav. He further says you can bring proof to this case from the words of the Nimuke Yosef, who comments on the Mishnah, who talks about two oxen who damage each other, adkan devarav. What is the case over there? He says, so what does he mean by that? So the Makor Baruch says, he says, Dehine kasav b'mishnah sham shnei shvarim tamim shekablu zeh zeh mishalmin b'mosar chatzi nezek. Two oxen, if an ox gores without having any record of being a gorer, we call that a tam, right? He doesn't have any criminal record, this ox, and he gores and he damages. So the owner of the ox has to pay chatzi nezek, has to pay half damages. What if two oxen gore each other? So you basically hold each party liable for half damage, and whichever one is more valuable gets compensated the difference. Okay, so if let's say
This comes from the body of the.
yeah, so if the damage of one ox is 100 and the other one is 150, okay, let's say they kill each other, okay, or they give each other mortal wounds and they later die, and so now you want to assess the damages. So one ox was worth 100, the other one was worth 150. So you assess the guy who owns the guy who owns the ox for 100 is owed $50 by the other party. But the guy who owned the ox that was worth 150 is owed now 75. So you look at the difference between 50 and 75, that's 25. So the guy who had the more expensive ox has to be compensated $25. That's the way you look at it. That's what the Mishnah says. Because of Hanimuke Yosef Sham, Mishnah Bola Lamdenu, and the Nimuke Yosef writes in his commentary that what the Mishnah is coming to teach, the Im Lamashal Shavare Ruvain v'Shimon Heziku Zeh et Zeh, that if the oxen of Reuven and Shimon damage each other, v'achar kach hashor shel Reuven holach liibud, and then after assessing the damages, Reuven's ox is only partially injured, right? But then afterwards it dies. Ein Reuven yachol omer l'Shimon shehu chayav l'shalim lo mishoro even sheshor tam mishalim migufo. V'sheruven atzmo yiyeh poter even sheshoro avad v'shor tam mishalim rak migufo. He says when you pay the damages, you pay the damages from the body of the ox. But let's say if Reuven's ox later gets destroyed, so you can't harvest any value from Reuven's shore, Reuven can now not say to Shimon that Shimon, you pay me and I don't have to pay you anything, because since the halacha is you assess the value of the damage from the body of the ox, and my ox is now no longer here, let's say the carcass got lost in a fire, or it flowed down the river, or whatever it is, so therefore I don't have to pay you anything. Ela mishalmin b'motar chatzi nezek ayin sham. But rather we say that since at the moment that the damage occurred, both Reuven's ox was intact and Shimon's ox was intact, their bodies were intact, you have to assess the damage from the carcasses that were there at the time. V'imnomar shemisha hezik lechaber chayfetz ve'achar kach hachayfetz nignav unevad hamazik potter. He says, if we're going to say that if someone damages his friend's object, and then that object gets stolen or lost or destroyed, that the damager is potter, as gam kan Shimon hayochol omer leReuven harisharcha halach leibud v'nimsa shlo hifsadeti yotcha benezek sheli. Then why can't Shimon say that your ox is no longer here, and so I haven't caused you any damage? Elavadai degamim achar kach hachefetz halach leibud mikol makom alamasik l'shalom. The bottom line is that even though the object is no longer intact, the mazik still has to pay. The damager still has to pay.
That's the same for civil law? That's the same as civil law,
So-
what the rabbi saying here? Civil law, is that the same way also?
I think so, yeah.
So when there's sequential acts of damage to a person's property, you freeze in time essentially. At that moment that the first person caused the damage, you freeze the frame and say, okay, what is this guy chayav? Chayav for the cost of a mirror, shoin, gepaska, okay? 5 minutes later, the car gets stolen. That's irrelevant, because at the moment right after he caused the damage, that's when he becomes liable. And that's really the bottom line. V'lochein benidon didan pashut shechayav l'shalem. And therefore, in a case like ours, of the broken car mirror, it's obvious that the damager has to pay. The imbal harechev mekabel tashlum malei mehabituach berotza hamazik liftor atzmo kevin shein labal harechev hefsid. He says, if, however, if the guy who got his car stolen is getting a payment from the insurance company, and therefore the guy who broke the mirror says, why should I have to pay you? The insurance is replacing the entire car, including the mirror, so why should I have to pay? Ayin masha kasavnu b'shut baruch oimer b'din hamazik bayit mevutach. That b'din hamazik bayit mevutach. See what I said in my tshuva about a person who damages and that's in Siman Sadi Hay, so which we should really go back to Siman Sadi Hay and just review the laws of how the insurance company is involved. So let me just go back for a minute. I want to go back and see that. We'll just, in the last few minutes that we have remaining here, let's see how we dealt with this from the insurance policy standpoint, okay? Shall we?
So the more recent the insurance would, the value of that time, so would be minus their.
Yeah, the insurance company usually uses actual cash value, which is the same as market value, which would value it less than mirror.
Right, right.
It wouldn't be extra.
Let me just see.
No, but if the person is deceitful, whatever, and doesn't disclose an insurance company, I guess the question is, the guy still owe the money. Double dipping is called.
Let me just see. Hold on. Tzadi Hey. No, so it's got to be later than this. This I just they made me download Windows 11 and it's given me it's a pain in the neck. Here, let me just see here. Maybe it's this one. Sorry. Sorry, Bays. No, so it's got to be the next one. So it's 13. Okay, here we go. There we go. Sadi Dalid. Sadi Hey. Tashlum Socher al Niske Bayit Mevutach. This was a shaila about renting an apartment, remember? And I had, when I signed the lease, I assumed all liability on damage, including if the apartment burns down, but no, lo aleinu, the house burned down. And then I discovered that the owner of the apartment or of the house has fire insurance, and he'll get his replacement from the insurance company. Do I still have liability or not? So we went through this tshuva. So he basically he quoted the Or Sameach about a case. The mikra kazeh shahay lefanav v'tana socher shal dad zeh shamasku yikabel et hakesef v'makom acher lo kibel alav achrayos. The tenant wants to claim that I only accepted liability if the guy would be out of pocket. But if he's being made whole by the insurance company, I never had intention to accept liability. So the Or Sameach says that he's still obligated to pay. And he brings proof from the Gemara in Bava Kama, which says that if a river comes by and wipes out and sweeps away my donkey and my friend's donkey. Remember we had this case? And the guy, there's Reuven and Shimon. Reuven's donkey and Shimon's donkey both get swept away. Shimon turns to Reuven and he says, I think I can save your donkey. Are you willing to assume the loss of my donkey and pay me? Because your donkey is much more valuable. Your donkey is worth 200, mine's only worth 100. I can only save one of them. Are you willing to pay me the 100 if I save your donkey that's worth 200? Reuven says, sure. Okay. And then it turns out that when the river, they go down the river and they discover that Shimon's donkey is still okay. In other words, miraculously it was saved. Okay. So does Reuven still have to pay for Shimon's donkey? Okay. So what's the case? Asks the Gemara. If Shimon's donkey miraculously emerges alive, so and the Gemara says that Reuben still has to pay Shimon the $100 that he agreed to for the services that Shimon provided. So when I assume liability, I'm promising basically to pay you for when damage occurs in your property, because I'm using it, let's say, or whatever it is, right? Or because I damaged it. I assume liability. You're getting compensated anyway from the insurance company, doesn't matter. He says, he says, since once Reuven accepted upon himself the liability to pay, because we agreed between us that by my saving your donkey, you'll pay me for my loss, שבסוף המצל לא יפסד את חמור, מכל מקום לא יכול לומר לו, שעל דס כן לא יזכי אפילו לך, יכול המצל לומר, מה יכבס לך מהשמיים ריחמו עליי? He says, because Shimon could say to Reuven, He says that was an act of God, that that was somehow protection came to me, and therefore it's not for you to say that you want to exempt yourself. So certainly in this kind of case, where a person takes out an insurance policy, protects himself, but that's got nothing to do with your acceptance of liability. L'chein lahalacha tzarech hasocher l'shon k'fi she'itchayev af al pi she'amaskim lekabel hakesef mehabituach. And therefore, the guy who accepted liability for the apartment that burns down still has to pay, even though the guy has insurance. Now, there's a little bit more to talk about it, but that was the psak of Rav Shiraga. I think at that time, our view had told us that that's not exactly secular law.
Well, actually, yeah, it's not exactly, but the general rule is that in landlord-tenant situation, whoever has a covenant in the lease for insurance, they've assumed liability for that thing. So even if, say, the landlord has insurance, if the tenant's negligent, tenant doesn't have to pay, and the insurance company will pay from the landlord's side, and it doesn't have a right of subrogation against the tenant either.
Subrogation, that's what's the word.
The landlord doesn't have a right to sue, neither does the insurance company. But if the tenant, like you say in this case, has a special clause in the lease that says he'll assume liability for that fire, despite the fact that the landlord has insurance, that overrides the insurance clause.
Okay, so it has to be explicit
It has to be
in
explicit.
the
In the
contract.
absence of an explicit clause, the person who has the insurance pays, now the other person's exempt.
Okay, now what happens in a case where a person has his property damaged, but he has damage insurance? So does that
Right, so
exempt the
that's an
damager?
exception, right, so no, so then he can get his insurance and the other guy's still liable.
Okay, because that's different from a
Yeah.
tenant landlord
It's
situation.
different, right. So the private insurance is an exception to the general. He can benefit, if he paid the extra, separate contract. The other guy doesn't get to benefit from the other guy's contract. That was
Right.
the special.
But that doesn't really apply in cases of no fault insurance in today's
No.
world, right? So if, let's say, you and I, God forbid, get into a fender bender, and it's clearly my fault, I still, as long as you're insured,
Right.
I'll be off the hook, basically,
Right.
right? Because that's what no fault insurance is all
Exactly.
about. And I guess they came up with no fault insurance to avoid litigation in court.
Correct.
It streamlines the.
That's statutory. That has nothing to do with contract or anything. That's the legislation that makes that happen. It's not a
Right.
contractor.
Right. So I'm just curious, if you live in an area which has no fault in auto insurance, and when I back into my parking spot, I smash your mirror, and you're going to be made whole by the insurance company anyway.
Right. Still have to pay.
So Rav Shiraga says, according to halacha, that the mirror damager would have to pay.
Yeah, same.
But what about the law today? What about because of no fault insurance?
I don't think that's when the auto insurance covers that part. I think that's just property damage.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Why is that not called? That's not because the car was not moving. Is that the reason?
Yeah. There's exceptions to all that, how it all works, but I don't think maybe that's covered. Actually, I don't know. I don't know if that situation backing into it or whatever is covered, because it is moving. I'm not sure.
Okay, so we've stumped the Marv again.
I'm not looking this one. It's not my area.
Not my job. Okay. Yeah, okay. All right. So anyway, everyone have a wonderful Chag. And
Thanks,
we'll
man.
take a break now for Sukkot, and then we'll take a break the week after Sukkot. So what we're talking about is regrouping the first Monday in November, which is, I think, November 4th or something like that.
It's the 4th.
Is the 4th? Okay. So have a wonderful, so November 4th is when we're back, so we're off 1 week, 2 weeks, like we're off for 2.5 weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
Chag Sameach, everybody.
Thanks, man.
Xag Sameach.
Sameach.
That's Samir.
Yeah, good. How about you? Everything